Freedom of thought is the greatest freedom of all, because that's where freedom begins, in our minds. But it's difficult to experience that freedom when you're burdened with too many fears and anxieties, particularly about beliefs rooted in time-honored, glorified superstitions crafted by desert-dwelling nomads from the Bronze Age who probably didn't even realize they lived on a round planet. And this is why freedom from religion is even more important than freedom of religion, because it's difficult to experience your fullest potential, which freedom of thought can bring, if your mind is littered with demonstrable falsehoods, especially ones based on threats of eternal damnation in an afterlife such as hell, which isn't even mentioned in the Old Testament, or worse yet, being threatened with murder for leaving your faith, as is recommended by Islam. By the way, I'm not sure if this is the official logo for atheism. There seems to be quite a few different ones out there, but I find this to be the most elegant one. Not that atheism should need a logo, since there's no organization to join, no membership dues to be paid, and atheism shouldn't even be a word when you think about it. Ricky Gervais summed it up best this way.
There shouldn't even be a word for atheism. It shouldn't exist. Shouldn't need it. There's not a word for not believing in fairies. And if people didn't keep inventing these weird, impossible deities, we wouldn't have to go around denying them.
But theism and beliefs in supernatural beings are some of the unfortunate results of our reflexive but often faulty thought patterns. It's why our most basic instincts can betray us sometimes as we try to process reality. There's a lot of trial and error involved in simply surviving on this planet, which is why it's not only demonstrably false spiritual belief systems that hold people back from freedom of thought. The same applies to secular ideologies like communism and Marxism, which people wrongfully associate with atheism. While it is true, most communist regimes outlawed religions such as the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, it wasn't because Joseph Stalin thought it was so important that people see through the falsehoods of religion. That's not why millions of Russians needlessly died during his tyranny. As a matter of fact, Joseph Stalin was actually quite religious in his youth. Enough so that he even considered going to seminary school to become a priest. That is until he, like Mao Zedong, got a taste for power behind the barrel of a gun. Without turning this video into a mini documentary on the lives of Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong, it's important to note that the millions of Russians and Chinese who were executed or starved to death during their reign was due to their desires to keep a stranglehold on absolute power. And they found religion to be a threat to that power, and that's why they had a problem with religion. Not because they were trying to save people from religion, considering Karl Marx's infamous quote, "Religion is the opiate of the masses." Depending on which biographies of Joseph Stalin's life you might read, some have reported he would sometimes still pray to God for guidance while writing up his kill lists. And nowadays, well after over half a century after his death, and all the historical facts that have been exposed about this often smiling, avuncular, seemingly harmless human monster, there's still enough Russians that hail this man as a hero and willingly hang his portrait in their homes as if he was some sort of god. It's worth noting this because it speaks volumes of how deadly wrong millions of people can be when it comes to choosing and following their leaders. Clearly, fear is one of the driving forces behind this self-flagellating subservience that I shudder to think I might have fallen for too. Especially if society fell apart to the point where the only hope people look forward to is simply not ending up in prison on trumped-up charges decided by the government the day before. Fortunately, I never had to endure such an experience. And I have my parents to thank for that, since they fled a communist regime which took over their nation of Cuba, where to this day, even after this despot's death, there are still people who also hang the portrait of this once walking, talking societal tumor. And of course, outsiders who never lived it find it somehow romantic to continue singing his praises, just to prove their pseudo-intellectual leftist bona fides without ever realizing the useful idiots they actually are. And that's the thing about communism. In a sense, it has also functioned as a religion. No amount of food shortages, restrictions on people's liberties, executions by firing squads for political reasons only, or even the banning of certain music such as rock and roll, which was outlawed in the Soviet Union as well as Cuba. None of these impositions on people's right to live their lives as they saw fit was enough to convince certain people that communism is a predictably failed economic system. However, the major difference worth noting between how communism is defined as opposed to every religion created by man is that the technical definition of communism is not a lie. The definition of communism is an economic system where all the means of production and property are owned by the state. There is nothing false about this definition. It is very possible to structure a society where everything is owned by the government, including your home, and it's been achieved numerous times throughout history. The communist lie rears its ugly head by claiming that the state is representative of the people when in actuality, the state is a one-party regime that prohibits any opposition to the point of imprisoning and even murdering political dissidents as well as journalists who expose this lie. And the biggest lie about communism is that when it's done correctly, it can solve economic inequalities and bring economic prosperity to everyone equally. But the only equality ever achieved by any communist government has been the equality of oppression. Because you can't have communism and freedom at the same time. By its very definition, no one is allowed to own anything. And the ramifications that come from that regulation are not simply that you don't ever need to envy your neighbor owning a sports car that you don't. After all, what drives most anyone to wish for a communist equality utopia is often the envy of others being more successful than they are. And since every communist regime has usually been run by economically illiterate, megalomaniacal, sadistic psychopaths, suffice to say, communism functions like a religion even when it outlaws them. Bottom line, please don't confuse communism for atheism. And for anyone who insists that they're one and the same, they're either incapable of distinguishing the difference, or they're disinforming people because they're understandably afraid of communism, but they're doing themselves no favors by being equally afraid of atheism. Because there's nothing to fear about atheism. All atheism means is simply that you're not a theist. That's all. And every theist is practically an atheist to every other religion and god other than their own. The difference between theists and atheists is that atheists just disbelieve in one god further, usually the one they were brought up to worship. And this is why atheism is a superpower, because it frees up your mind from nonsense you don't need to believe, and a whole host of other needless ceremonies you don't need to participate in. You're free to do whatever you want with your spare time, namely your weekends. And you'll have more money in your pocket because you don't feel the guilt of obligation to give away your money to a church, especially if they're suggesting that you tithe 10% of your income, let alone before taxes. But most importantly, you'll be free of domineering people and bad faith actors who are trying to get you to do things for their benefit, but not your own. You'll also be free of feeling the need to be surrounded by people you don't care for, considering the amount of people who mention they can't stand nosy, gossipy churchgoers. This way, you'll be able to pick and choose who you really want in your life, not who your pastor or your rabbi or your cleric, or worse yet, some murderous tyrant who dictates how you will live and even think under their religious-like cult of personality. Again, this is why atheism is a superpower. It puts your destiny in your hands, not at the mercy of some fictitious supreme being whose imaginary judgment is really your subconscious guiding you after all. Or again, communist dictators that try to convince you they are gods on earth. Atheism frees you to think for yourself, live your life as you see fit, and hopefully you can use that superpower to call out all the ancient, faulty, short-sighted thought processes that keep others from reaching their full potential without having some delusional sky daddy, let alone some autocratic big brother making you feel as if they're watching your every move. If I got anything wrong in this video, let me know in the comments below. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for upcoming videos, and check out the links below for my original art and merchandise. And thanks for watching.